Thank you, Catherine, for your wonderful presentation on sufficiency, which I think is an incredibly important part of the degrowth canopy, I suppose, of ideas. Now, my topic is a big one, protecting long-term interests in a short-term world. And as we think about the current election campaign, just think about the extent to which short-term issues are dominating the big long-term issues. It's a tragedy. I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to just touch in on a few. And those of you who would like to see the full suite of slides, I'm very happy to email them to you. Catherine finished with a quote. There's a few quotes here, and the last of these from Al Gore, former Vice President of the United States, I think is very apposite. The future whispers while the present shouts. And again, think 2023 New Zealand Aotearoa general election. It is hard to protect long-term interests. And there are many, many reasons for that. And it's important that we understand that there are many reasons. This is not a simple matter. And I've listed just some of the reasons there in that list. They connect with the human condition, institutions, geopolitics, all manner of things, including, last but by no means least, the very nature of certain types of problems. And one of the problems that is very hard to get action on to protect is the category of problems known as creeping problems or slow problems or long problems. And those sorts of problems are characterized by there being a lengthy temporal gap, possibly of a generation or more, between the causes of the problem and the full effects of the problem, which means that people don't perceive early enough kind of what's going wrong. And that problem of a creeping nature is writ large in the environmental area, be it water pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss, or whatever you. These are creeping problems, and they're inherently difficult to address because of this temporal gap and all manner of other things as well, uncertainty, policy differences, scientific differences, and so on. So recognizing that there are many, many reasons why it is difficult to protect long-term interests, we need a suite of measures to respond to that problem, a multi-pronged approach. And I've listed here some of the sorts of things that can be done to help protect long-term interests. They include, and in a way Catherine has touched on some of these, they include the use of what are called commitment devices. Commitment devices are those things where you make a commitment which then, to some extent, either legally or morally, or both, binds you to do certain sorts of things. Our climate change legislation, which includes a climate change commission and the setting of targets and so on, that's a classic example of an instrument with multiple commitment devices. Another way is to embed within policy frameworks the long term. So think about discount rates. What's the discount rate that you're using? If it's 5 to 10%, well, that's going to devalue the future at a very rapid sort of rate. We can create funds to help us transition to different sorts of circumstances. So we have the Cullen Fund at the moment to help us as the population ages in the future. We can try and enhance the capacity of our political system to exercise foresight, to do scenario work, to think about what the big trends are and what their implications might be, and so forth. We can create institutional voices for the future, such as our Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, such as our now Children's Commission. We used to have a Children's Commissioner. And I'll come back to that point shortly in relation to Wales. We can expand the role of participation in decision-making, so you get more buy-in for the big sort of long-term decisions that need to be taken. And we can also finally try and create a political culture that facilitates durable bargains. Not always easy. Now, I just want to say a few words about the way in which one particular jurisdiction, namely Wales, has sought to embed many of the things I've just mentioned: commitment devices, a policy framework, exercise of foresight, institutional voices for the future, and so on. So a very gifted Welsh politician by the name of Jane Davidson helped inspire what is now the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015. Jane has spoken here in New Zealand a number of times via Zoom and webinars, and I've had the privilege of participating in a number of events with her. This book is her summary of the sort of background to the Welsh legislation, what it tries to do, and how it's worked in recent years. So, in a nutshell, the Welsh have passed legislation now 8 years ago, which embraces a range of mechanisms to try and force that particular subnational government within the United Kingdom to act in ways that will protect the sustainability of Wales. And that includes a series of 7 well-being goals, 5 ways of working, the establishment of an independent Future Generations Commissioner with staff and resources, the establishment of new public service boards to advocate on behalf of long-term interests, and obligations on ministers to do certain sorts of things to protect long-term interests. Here are the 7 goals in the sort of the donut, and the 5 ways of working. 5 ways of working, focusing on the long run, prevention, collaboration, integration, and involvement. These are 5 key things that all public bodies in Wales have to give an emphasis to, including the government as a whole. The 5 goals you can see include being globally responsible, being prosperous, interesting to know exactly what they mean by that, being resilient, being healthier, being more equal. Interesting, isn't that? A jurisdiction actually agreeing to try and become more equal. I wish we could do that here. Cohesive communities and a vibrant culture and a thriving Welsh language. Well, we could have the same for Te Reo and so forth in this jurisdiction. All right, so in specific terms, what does the legislation require? Well, first of all, with respect to the Government of Wales, it requires ministers to publish specific wellbeing objectives, to set national indicators to measure progress towards achieving the 7 wellbeing goals, and to set milestones for the national indicators. It requires them to publish annually reports on progress, and to publish a so-called future trends report every Parliament. In addition, the Future Generations Commissioner, which is established under the legislation, is there to promote the Sustainable Development Principle, and that principle is taken from the Brundtland report, a very, very significant report back in 1987, which defined sustainable development as ensuring that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So I've listed there some of the things that the Welsh Future Generations Commissioner is responsible for doing. They've had 2 commissioners now. The first, Sophie Howe, who was here in New Zealand just a few weeks ago. Some of you may have heard her on the radio or been to an event with her. She's stood down just a few months ago and been replaced by the second commissioner. I'm not going to go through that. Just a couple of points to recognise that, notwithstanding this legislation, implementation is hard. These are hard things to do to protect future generations. And Wales, of course, is constitutionally constrained. It is a sub-government within the United Kingdom, so it has limited constitutional and policy responsibilities. And it's taken a long time to kind of begin to change the Welsh governmental system in the direction of a greater emphasis on sustainability. Now, Catherine mentioned the Productivity Commission, which we could rename the Sustainability or the Sufficiency Commission. They produced a report recently called A Fair Chance for All. Some of you may have seen this report, in which they drew heavily on the Welsh model for some of their ideas. And to conclude, I just want to mention a few of the things that this particular report emphasises, because some of this is very, I think, close to the heart of people involved with the post-growth or degrowth movement. So their recommendations include creating a more adaptive, experimental and learning approach to public management, having a social protection floor sufficiency, enacting social inclusion legislation, complementing the Child Poverty Reduction Act, requiring governments to specify their short and long-term objectives for reducing persistent disadvantage, and enacting Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which would establish under it, as in Wales, a Parliamentary Commissioner for Future Generations. The roles of that Future Generations Commission are set out in that slide. Don't expect you to be able to read it quickly, but basically doing many of the things that the Welsh Commissioner for Future Generations is required to do. Now, this raises a whole lot of issues, which I haven't got time to go into, but just to note that if we were to think about having a Wellbeing for Future Generations Act with some sort of new commissioner or commission for future generations, it's going to be really important to think carefully about its precise responsibilities, its powers, and how it would fit with existing institutions such as the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the Climate Change Commission, the Children's Commission, and so on. And those matters need careful, thoughtful analysis. So just to conclude, we obviously face some huge, if not unprecedented, policy challenges locally and globally. There are very powerful incentives which we can see in our midst right now for governments to focus on short-term interests at the expense of long-term interests. Safeguarding long-term interests requires a huge amount of effort and a multi-pronged approach. There's no simple silver bullet. There are various reforms that we could make here to enhance the quality of anticipatory governance and to better protect long-term interests. I hope we have an election campaign in the future at some point where these matters actually get serious attention. At the moment, sadly, they're not. And with that, I'll leave you in peace. Thank you.